Morning.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Hey, Jane. Good to see you. Can't say yay.
I see Jane's hand.
Yeah. Did you want a manicure? What are you doing here? What are you sticking it in the screen? I love it. Okay.
Somebody already put something in the chat. What was that? Oh, Rosa.
Let's see.
Also saying good morning.
Good morning. Yeah. Hey, Rosa. Hey, Sage. Hello.
How are you doing, Jack?
Good. A little cool for my taste.
Oh.
11 o'clock, if I may. Candace called this meeting of the special meeting of the Jerome Town Council to order today, Tuesday, December 29th, 11 a.m. And I ask Candace to please call the roll.
Mayor Dillenburg,
Here?
Vice Mayor Worth,
Present.
Ms. Moore,
Here.
Ms. Harvey,
Here,
and
Miss Barber.
Ms. Barber.
Present.
Hey, they. All right, yeah. It's funny how this works. God, what a strange time. Anyway, all right. Well, we're going to be talking about, thank you, Candace. We're going to be talking about code enforcement today. Do we need Bill to sign into this, or is this just us today?
Bill is, he's got a conflict today, so he isn't able to join us.
Okay, cool. So,
But we can collect questions and pass them on to him.
okay, good. So I know the first thing on here was possible code in amendments. And I don't know if you and John want to start us off on that, and please, or John, how do you want
I'd like to, Dr. Mayor, I'd like to do a brief staff report and just kind of walk you through quickly some of
Quickly
the
is
things
good.
that we're talking about.
Yes.
So John Knight, zoning administrator for the audio. We anticipate this is not a one and done thing, that this is going to be a dialogue and a little back and forth. I'm continuing to do research with other jurisdictions. I still have to connect with our Yavapai County folks, code enforcement, but I've learned a lot just since I've been calling folks and doing some research. So I think there's some discussion items that we're hoping to get direction on. I've already, after talking to other jurisdictions, got a pretty good idea of how we could update our process.
Join the meeting.
So really quick, the things that I see, I think there may need to be some updates to our zoning ordinance so that our zoning ordinance is consistent with our chapter 18, our town code. We need to talk a little bit about whether and how we approach code enforcement. In the past. For the most part, it's been complaint driven. Chief Alan Muma, I was hoping he was going to join us today. I don't know if
That may be him on the phone.
okay. I was hoping Chief Muma could join us. He provided some great information going back now 10 years or more that this has been talked about. Some of these things have been talked about. So, you know, basically we need to decide if we're going to drive around, our staff are going to drive around with blinders on and wait for a complaint to come in, or if we're going to take a little more proactive approach. I've got some thoughts on that. As much as I would like to drive around with blinders on, we have to be consistent in the way we enforce our code. So I don't think we need to say too much more about that. We need to have some little bit of discussion. Alan did a great job in his memo. Chief Muma did a great job in his memo talking about civil versus criminal, and lowering that bar from a criminal to a civil, I think makes a lot of sense for most situations. Somebody's doing something dangerous, sure, that's different. But if it's somebody's adding on to a deck or something, you know, that doesn't necessarily need to be a criminal thing. And then finally, we wanted to talk about the roles of the different staff members. To my surprise, I think Chief Muma is very interested in assisting with the documentation and tracking of code enforcement complaints and processes, which I think is great. So I'll have some additional discussions with the chief about that. Really quickly, I want to go through a couple of things in a little bit more detail. Is the zoning ordinance and the town code. I've provided those excerpts for you. They are a little bit different. The zoning ordinance does talk about a $300 fine. It has a unique provision. I'm watching Jane's dog. It has a unique provision about imprisonment in the town jail And I went in to see Alan the other day, and the town jail, I believe, is full of storage right now. I think they're using it for document filing storage. So you wouldn't want to stuff somebody in the town jail for 90 days and have them sitting on our boxes there. Fines, had some good information from Bisbee. Candace suggested I contact Bisbee, and I've never been there. In my discussions with the community development director there, it sounds fairly similar to Jerome. A part of it sounds very similar to Jerome in some ways. They actually double not only the building fine, which we currently do, but they double the design review, site plan review fine, which I think that has a lot of merit. That might be a great way to approach the fines as opposed to a ticket, which is a little more complicated. And I'll like to get Chief Muma's input on that. But just having a fine that somebody comes in if they've started work without permits, that we double, triple, quadruple, I don't know what we want to do with that. But I think that may be appropriate, not just the building fine. If I'm building a small project, my building permit fee might be $50 or $100. Well, it's not much of a deterrent if I have to pay $200 for a building permit fee. So I think that would help if we add the design review and site plan review fees and increase those as well for people who do work without permits. In terms of strategy, I already mentioned, I think, as much as I'd like to just drive around and pretend I didn't see any code violations, I think that creates a real problem for us when we go to enforce one particular violator and he turns around and points at 3 or 4 other people doing the exact same things. And it's on the public street. And it's like, why aren't you going after those guys? Well, we didn't get a complaint from anybody. I don't think we can stand behind that if those items end up in going to the magistrate. So we need to change our strategy a little bit. And then lastly, we need to talk about the roles and the staff people. I see Chief Muma's coming in right now. We need to talk a little bit about the roles, how we integrate with police, fire, and building department and zoning. My sense is that if we get a complaint, whether it's a noise complaint or weeds or a sign violation, we pick somebody as the lead, and then everybody else is copied on it, and we coordinate together, and we find a system. If Chief Muma is willing to help us with that, we find a system that we can use to track those violations. And I just want to make sure everybody's aware. The attorney, depending on the complexity, if it's just a sign and I call somebody and they take it down, done. But if it gets complicated, we're going to include the attorney, so there's going to be some more legal fees involved. If it does get more involved than just a simple warning, then and voluntary compliance, and we're going to have to include a hearings officer, and that provision is in our code right now. And then the next step from the hearings officer decision is somebody can appeal to the magistrate, so our town court. Most jurisdictions, 95% of the time, possibly more, it never gets as far as the hearings officer, and they get voluntary compliance. So, and that's been my experience so far, is a few people we have to keep on top of, but for the most part, we've received voluntary compliance almost all of the time. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to you guys and hand it back to you and see. I know Chief Muma is on. Be interested in hearing his thoughts on his role from the police department as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Any members, any council members have any questions or things they want to discuss? I can certainly have Chief Muma react a little bit and get his input, and thank him so very much for how thorough he's being with this and helpful with this. It's awesome. Any questions or comments from council members, please? Hearing none. Chief Muma, did you have anything you'd like to add or share with us at this point?
Well, I shared some memos with you. I've been in discussions with Attorney Bill Sims for some time. I'd asked him to attend this meeting. There was a conflict in his scheduling, so he was unable to do so. So, the groundwork has already been laid for this. If you saw from my memos, they go back 12 years when I tried to get some of this stuff decriminalized. That's been done now. The second phase of that was trying to come up with some orderly way of doing business when we have a complaint. And that was done with a memo, I think, just about 3 months after that kind of actually still pertains to this very day, even though back then we still had all of our ordinances were criminal. The memo that I had handed out that the council adopted at that time as policy still holds true today, because it doesn't matter whether it's a civil violation or criminal. It has to be tracked some way. And our code basically outlines the fact that in each of the departments, be it fire, be it zoning, be it building, the head there will be the ordinance enforcement officer. We don't have a true ordinance enforcement department. I made a number of phone calls over the past week, checking with a number of towns in Arizona, and they do it one of two ways if they have an ordinance enforcement department. That is, it's either attached to the police department, Cottonwood, Clarkdale are like this, or it's under developmental services, Glendale, a couple of other metropolitan areas that have a big enough town and big enough staff have a developmental services, and oftentimes it's under there. I spoke to the president of the Ordinance Enforcement for Arizona Association. I got some really good insight from her. Before she went to, I think it's Surprise she's out of, she came from a small town where, believe it or not, she was parking and ordinance enforcement. So there's various ways of doing it. I don't really care. I wanted to be kind of pointed in my memo that the one thing that I think is imperative is all of these from complaint to finish are tracked properly. All of my cases are tracked through my RMS system, which is my records maintenance system. They're done by address, by person, by several other different ways of indexing these things and looking to them. That system can be used for this as well. We don't have to buy, I could add another license. We don't have to buy more software. I do think it's imperative, though, if we start on something, that we finish it and that the records are kept. Because if you'll remember, about 6 years ago, I did, longer than that, I think it was before Candace came, I did an investigation into records that were missing out of town hall. And I was appalled. There were property records. I can tell you one on the Robinson house. Most of the records that were there were gone. Now, why is that? There was no record control, so we can't exactly tell. But there's been a lot of things missing out of town hall. That's not the case in the PD. I'm audited. Everything is there. We have security on all of them. Again, this is just for those complaints. I think that they should be supervised by the PD to make sure that reports are done, they're accurate, and the steps are taken in the process that was outlined back in 2000, whatever I said, 8, I think, so that this is not done improperly. And then in the second part of my memo, and I'm sorry, I'm on my cell phone, so I can't see anybody else. So second part of my memo, I said, you as the council needs to decide what's priority here, because I have to be honest. I have a professional opinion, and then I have a bit of a personal opinion. My professional opinion is sooner or later, we're going to get in trouble again. And that is for selective enforcement. I can tell you of buildings that have been in perpetual building mode for the 21 and a half years I've been here. I can tell you of properties that have abandoned cars and junk and rodents, and that have been a problem that has been identified, but nobody wants to deal with it because this person is, how shall I say, maybe they think might be a boogeyman or something. And so he gets ignored. And yet then we go over to another residence and say, you got to clean this junk out of your yard. Sooner or later, somebody's going to get wind of that, and you're going to have a problem. So the council needs to either change the ordinances or make a priority and say, we're going to address these problems. And if they fall within the building department, because I can tell you of apartments that I saw being built that I personally turned into the building department, that nothing was done about it. Okay. Now, then they would say to me, well, do you want to file a complaint? Can't force somebody to file a written complaint. Okay. That procedure is going to get you in trouble as well. So, I guess I was a little lost in what this whole thing was going to be about. If John was trying to see that we actually create an ordinance enforcement department. The PD takes care of decriminalized noise ordinances, barking dogs, things of this nature as it stands. We've done that ever since I've been here. The only thing the other department heads do are deal with building, or they're supposed to, zoning, and fire issues, okay? And then those issues, we should assist, track, so that there's an outcome that can be reviewed in years to come. Nobody ever wonders what happened to the records on this piece of property. So I gave you the memos, I gave you the past memos. I talked with Bill at length, and I guess I just open it up to questions if you have of me, so I don't just wander and keep going.
Thank you, Chief. I've got a question, but I don't see any hands up. Are there any questions?
Sage and Jane both have their hands up.
Okay, Sage, let's start with you and then we'll go to Jane, please.
So I just want to ask Alan, do you feel like we should, can you hear me?
Yep, you broke
In
up
and
a little
out,
bit.
yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Now you're frozen.
Can't hear.
Is it still real broken?
Yeah. Can you put it in chat?
I'll let Jane go.
Sage, maybe if you turn off your video.
Let me actually turn my video off. Yeah, that's
There you
one of,
go.
okay. Can you hear me better now?
Much.
Yes.
That helped. Okay. So I guess I'm just wondering what Alan's opinion of it is. Should we try and make it to where code enforcement is all civil and through the zoning administrator?
No, because at this point, okay, so see, when we say code enforcement, that becomes it's kind of, code enforcement can be noise, it can be parking, it can be, we decriminalized the recent Prop 207, it can be all kinds of things, including fire code violations, zoning and building violations. So I think how we have it now is fine. I don't see any need to add people. We're not that big a town. I just think we need to make sure we delineate the roles and the procedures so that we don't get caught as years past we have and then end up in a lawsuit over something. Because if you remember, we've had situations where the town went into suits over multifamily uses of a property. If you remember, up on 5th and Center, I think it was. Remember that whole ordeal and the individuals that were involved. And then we allow a apartment to be created in a house somewhere else. So, had those people that were, how shall I say, the people that filed the lawsuit that we won as a town, that said you can't make this a duplex because it wasn't a duplex. We won that lawsuit, and they instead sold the property. And then we have another house in town that I can point out that we allowed an apartment to get built in. I mean, this is the stuff you as a council have to say, we can't tolerate that. You have to prioritize so we can deal with that. That's what I think the problem is. I can deal with noise and I can deal with parking. I can deal with all those issues, but individual departments, if they have a problem, need to deal with them. They need to deal with them properly. They can't have blinders on. And then the procedure must be done in accordance with what's best practices by law. Did that answer your question?
It did, Alan. I think that a lot of the reason that we're here is because there's some confusion about what the actual violation and penalty is for the different things. It didn't seem very clear to John and I when we were dealing with a couple of instances a month and a half ago. We had some people building without permits, building before they had gone before DRB. I mean, just stuff that is common sense that you have to get a building permit to do things. And it just seemed like it was such a hassle and it was going to cost us more to enforce that.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you. Jane, did you have a question?
Yes and no.
Okay, good.
I just wanted to say I thought Alan's memos in here were very good, and I think the procedure that he suggests is a really good one as well for
Yeah.
tracking some of these things. I mean, most of them don't turn out to be any big deal, and people go do what they're supposed to do. But some of them, and I've seen them over the years as well, turn out to be people that purposely intentionally don't want to follow what the ordinance says. And as far as complaints, Clarkdale has a form you can fill out, and I think we could do something similar where, because we are such a small town, the complaint can be anonymous. I mean, I hate thinking of neighbor wars. And then also the building inspector, zoning administrator sometimes sees things happening when they are around town and can instigate that. But then if you fill out a form and follow the procedure that's in here, it's not always necessary to involve the police, but at least the police department has a record that, you know, this person has been cited or told that they need to go get a building permit. And I think the ones where, you know, maybe more important to do that is where, especially where fire safety or health and safety is involved. But the minor ones, I mean, I still think it's important to keep track of complaints or something that somebody sees on a property. Just informing that person by letter and keeping track of it, that, hey, you need to go before design review, or you need to go before the planning and zoning, or you need a building permit, and that we have records kept of this, and that they did follow through or they did not follow through. I think these are all good suggestions. And I think making the zoning ordinance and the building or the town code consistent, the jail time, I think the class 1 misdemeanor, I don't know whether that's necessary, or the jail time either. And we want people to follow the ordinance, and I think we definitely do need to be consistent in this. I mean, for lots of reasons. And
Thank you.
I want to thank Alan for his good synopsis in here. And
Thank you.
I think we should follow that one.
Yes, thanks, Jane. And Alan, you raised one point that got my attention too, and that is, you know, as I walk into town almost every day, and I go by houses and I look and I see old vehicles. One looked like a 1971, similar to the one I had many, many years ago, and there's no way it's drivable. It's hanging off of the edge of the property. You know, I mean, I'm just waiting for one of these windstorms to bring it down to Douglas Road. And I'm wondering, what is there any, and I see, like I said, really junk parts and pieces of automobiles and motorcycles, you know, that are on people's property that are non-functional. And I don't know whether they're keeping them because they're antiques or great treasured gifts from a relative, or something. But it certainly struck me that there are potential dangers with especially with some of the I see vehicles just on their sides, upside down, hanging over, and looking at them, say these things are never going to be driven or taken off the property. And to the point that you raised, Chief, whether or not these are things that we should be considering, or just, you know, in our town, let people do what they want to do. It's their property. It's their, you know, their ownership of this vehicle or form of vehicle. I'd just like to get the council's thoughts on this, and yours as well, please.
But
Yes.
Jack, Mandy has had her hand up for a while, and there's
Oh, I'm
also,
sorry. I apologize, Mandy. I
there's also
wasn't aware of that.
somebody that says it's just iPhone, and that hand is up. I don't know who that is.
Okay. So, so my question, I guess we could hold it back a little bit and let's get Mandy's question resolved or comment.
Thank
you, Dr. Mayor. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I can't tell, sorry. I appreciate the history and memos from Chief Allen. I think that's such great information for us to have, as well as looking into what other cities are doing that John did. I have some concerns about things, but I'm going to keep it really simple for this particular point. Everybody needs to be treated the same, no matter how big, small, whatever, and it needs to be in writing and it needs to be consistent. And there needs to be follow-up. That's the other thing that I think that we're missing in some of this. Not only making sure that there's compliance and that people are getting things done, but also that there's follow-up, because what happens, and I don't know if the other council members have found this, but what I find is I get the complaints. So people come to me because they want to be anonymous, or they don't necessarily want to write it down on a formal form and hand it off, or they don't necessarily want to tell Alan or John or Candace. They're more comfortable coming to one of us as individuals. And so I get people that come to me and say, hey, this is happening. What do you know about it? Or, hey, this is happening next door to me and I think it's wrong. Or, hey, this person is doing this work and I don't see a permit in their window. Can you find out if they have a permit? I get that a lot. I want to say probably 10 to 12 times a week, where somebody is coming to me and asking that kind of a question. And I try to do my due diligence and hand that off to the appropriate department to say, hey, I've had this complaint. They're wondering if there's a building permit, that kind of thing. And as part of the tracking system that I love that Alan has suggested that we do, so we have everything, all of our ducks in a row, I would like to see some sort of follow-up procedure as well, with either the individual who made the complaint or with the council member who passed that on, so that that council member can then inform the citizen. Because then I'm getting like secondary and tertiary and, 3-4 times a week, the same person asking, hey, what do you know about this? What do you know about this? And I've not gotten any follow-up information. Having a tracking system is absolutely, especially something that is digital, is key. As John will tell you, I spend a lot of time digging through the archives, trying to see what's the background on this situation, or how did we handle this type of a situation with a different property? Because I want to see where we're coming from and where's the history on things. And you go through those parcel files and man, there is stuff missing for sure. Things that I have about parcels that my family owns that are not in the town's parcel files. And I'm just surprised and shocked. And so I want to make sure that everything is consistently applied, it is tracked, and that there's follow-up so that we can alleviate the situation and alleviate the stress and hopefully mitigate any sort of neighborly conflict issues.
Thank you. Thanks, Mandy. And Candy, you said someone on a phone line had a hand
There's
raised?
somebody that it just says iPhone. So,
That would be me. Can you hear me?
yes, who is
Who's
this?
that?
Margie Hardy, I don't know how to do this.
Oh.
So if I can just go with my voice, is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to point out a couple of things. When Alan was speaking about, I've never seen your report that you're referring to, so I don't know what is in it and the solution mentioned in it. But the situation, for example, that happened over on 5th Street, where we were sued, was totally handled through the zoning ordinance and the Board of Adjustment. That was one thing. And I mean, we have a really good process in place for any type of problems in that regard, where somebody wanted to use their building in a way in which they weren't allowed to. Okay, per this ordinance. But then the other thing is, and I don't like beating this to death. I worked in Clarkdale for years, and we used to just I did the front desk. I took all the complaints. I had software where I would enter in the complaint. The complainant, be it the town council member or a resident, anybody had a choice to remain anonymous. The consequences of remaining anonymous is that rather than getting a personal reply to the complaint, because you are anonymous now, you would have to call in, and because this is all public record, anybody can ask anything they want about it. So the individual making the complaint anonymously would call back in whatever time period and say, what happened to this? So they could follow through. They could see if there was follow through. But I took all the complaints, regardless of not police, and I had nothing to do with that, under their jurisdictions. This was like property maintenance code, zoning ordinance, that kind of thing. And what I would do is enter it into the computer and forward it to the proper individual. And it was tracked. And then within a certain period of time, they had to come back to me with a response to put in the computer. It was in a centralized file. Anybody could look at it at any time to see the outcome. I realize that could be implying that your front desk at Uptown would get a new job, but and I'm not saying that, but it wasn't really hard not to track complaints either anonymously or directly, and make sure everybody in town knows about it and it's on file on a computer for everyone to see. So that was just, and then like Jane said too, there is a form that Clarkdale used. If an individual were to walk in the door, say, or mail it or whatever, and it said, I want to be anonymous, and then they would report what was going on. And then the individual who would resolve the complaint still had to put down the resolution for the town record. And it went into the town record as far as that particular file in the computer. So anyway, that's how it was, and there was this was done through the development services department, mostly through the building inspector and the zoning administrator. There were no police involved as far as I know, unless I guess it got to a certain point, which then the civil becomes criminal in some way. So anyway, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mark.
Jack,
And,
Alan has his hand up.
yes, please, Chief.
Okay, a couple of things. First, something that you spoke about, our current code is pretty clear if you understand code as far as the decriminalized parts. Those sections, building, zoning, fire, and certain other sections of town code do allow for either civil, or if it's a situation, if you read in there or you go over some of Bill Sims's notes, you'll see that in the case where you've had multiple contacts with somebody and it doesn't warrant going the civil route because it hasn't, you can just cite them criminally. So it's an either or approach to all of them. It's not this will be civil and this will be criminal. The ones that we, the council or the town, decriminalize are still an either or situation based upon what's occurred there in the past, or maybe the initial contact from the official that speaks to them about it. If they go there and this person says pound sand, it may be one of those situations where you're not going to get anywhere and it just becomes a criminal act. So, the whole up to 90 days in jail or whatever, that's always been in the code since the time Jerome began. Everything in Jerome was a class 1 misdemeanor. Except for some very rare instances where we had petty offenses. So I just want you to know there, it is clear we have an either or approach on all of those where it's identified in. Okay, so that was the first thing I want to clear up. For Margie, I want to make sure I understand the Fifth Street situation and that lawsuit. But again, when you have that happening in one section of town and then you have another person doing essentially the exact same things, taking a single family house and making it a duplex, and we close our eyes to it, that's bad business. That's far from good practice, and it's going to get you caught up.
Yes.
So, and then as Jack was speaking of these vehicles, we have a town maintenance code as part of the building code. And it actually has items in there about abandoned vehicles and garbage, or what we would call garbage, which can be building products and things that bring pack rats in. And, we've had plague problems in the past, and we've had, cats that just breed incessantly in vacant buildings and junk piles and things like that. And again, there are places here where we will address this one and not address that one. And, that can't be, as Jane said, this should be, if the council makes it a priority, it should be done even fair and even handedly, but everybody has to get it. You know what I mean? It's not me or them, and that's just not right. If that's how we approach it, we're wrong as people, and we should get rid of the ordinance. I mean, that's just not right. That's just, I'm sorry. You know what I mean? That's the time I leave, because that's not treating people right. You as a council need to set priorities and policies, and then staff needs to go about it in a way that we are fair and impartial and to everybody. And I'm telling you right now, I know we've been through a lot of zoning administrators and a few building inspectors, and that's not been the case through the years. And I think you got to get a handle on that. And then I had one more thing, but I lost track of it. So I'll take my hand down now. If I remember it, I'll put it back up.
Thank you. Thanks so very much. If there are no more hands up at the moment, I'm just curious to that point. I mean, how do the other council members feel about these vehicles that are just sitting there unused, piles of junk for years, that become residents for rats, other critters, and potential risk in some form or another? I don't know, are any of you from your historical perspectives aware of any actions that have been taken, should be taken? I believe they should be taken. I just think we should be addressing it, but I'll leave that for the council to discuss and consider.
Sage has her hand up.
Yes, Sage.
So I just want to say, I agree with Alan. I believe that everything should be equal. Everyone needs to follow the same rules. I think that complaint driven is good, but also our enforcement needs to enforce when they see something going wrong. And then when something is brought to them by council members, because constituents have come to us and asked us, and yes, Mandy, I get that all the time. I really think that once it's been brought to light to whatever department it is, that it needs to be taken care of immediately and followed up. Everyone needs to follow the same rules in this town, because everyone can see everyone. One doesn't have to follow the rules and the other one doesn't want to have to follow the rules.
I agree. You're absolutely right, Sage.
Mandy has her hand up.
Okay, yes. Was that Mandy you said?
Yeah, Mandy.
Please.
Sorry, I had to find my mute button. Yeah, I gotta go back to the beginning of
You're breaking up.
and I used to get so frustrated. Sorry, I used to get so frustrated when things weren't being applied evenly. I mean, the rules are there for a reason, and you basically two options. You either follow them or you put yourself in a position to change them if you don't think they're right. And that's kind of it. And so I get very frustrated when I see now as a council member that things are not being applied evenly. The scrutiny is not being given equally to projects. And I don't disagree with Dr. Jack that there's definitely some cleanup issues that are safety hazards that are addressed under the property maintenance code that we've adopted. But I also think that we need to be looking at things that are being done currently, because that's something that we can stop before it becomes a hazard. And it's really frustrating to constantly be having the same complaints from citizens come at me about the same people doing the same kind of work, and then to not see anything that's happened as a result of that. And everybody just needs to be treated the same. Everybody needs to be subject to the same test.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. You, Sage, and the chief, I think we all would agree with that. And I don't, if there's an action that we should be taking to reinforce that, please consider that. What is it we should be doing? It should be equal, fair, and just. Absolutely.
Mayor Allen has his hand up.
Yes, Chief.
I remember my other part was my RMS system that I've had for almost 22 years now. I believe I can expand that and allow that code enforcement, whatever the specific topic might be, fire, zoning, or building, that I can expand that system to allow for any complaints that come into that to be at least logged in there. Because what's nice about that is there is a tracking mechanism. There is a way that reports are done in there, so they're viewed and supervised. The complaint that's called in, I believe I could even allow somebody like at a front desk to enter what we call a call for service, which is the initiating of a request for something to happen, which then can be followed up because it's now in the system and can be tracked from inception to conclusion. And whatever is done there, because I can give different levels of access to the system. So it's not like I'd be giving somebody, a building officer or something, complete access to the entire criminal history and everything that I've got. And there's 22,000 names and 56,000 entries in this system right now. But I can give them a level where, let's say, code enforcement is level 1. They have access to that. So they can enter it, look at it, follow it, track it. I can see what's going on. If it makes it to a criminal and we do a report, I can review the report. I can send kickbacks on the report that says, hey, we need these elements added. So, and all I'd have to do is call the manufacturer, who I personally know since I'm one of the longest customers in the US, believe it or not. And I think we could probably relatively inexpensively get it tailored to Jerome to handle all this, so we're not trying to reinvent the wheel.
Great.
Sounds great.
Mayor, it looks like Margie has her hand up again.
Okay. Margie?
You're muted, Margie.
You never sounded so good. I mean, this is good.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. I was wondering then if those documents or those records that would be part of the police department would be public records, because that's, to me, that's very important, because I'd like to know if I made a complaint 2 years ago, what was the outcome? And say, because I know police records probably aren't public record, or I don't really know what is and what isn't. I know that if it were done through the town hall, that almost everything up there is. So I would have access to that. What about on the software that Alan's referring to? And this is one question I also have for John, if I can ask him a question. Is that allowed?
Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor?
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. John, have you had very many complaints? Have very many people called you or come in to complain since you've been, on the staff?
I guess the simple answer is yes. I'd
You have
say 90% of the time it's resolved relatively simply. For example, I want to publicly thank James and Pam LeBlanc. We got a complaint about the size of a temporary banner they had. I emailed James, and within an hour, he'd already taken it down. That happens quite a bit. It's just a simple complaint. I contact the property owner, done. We do get complaints like we had on Juarez, where the gentleman had started construction. I wasn't aware of it. I don't drive down Juarez every day. The gentleman started construction without permits. I contact them. They say, oh, okay, I'll go ahead and go through the process. But there was no penalty. And I think that's the one area that I would like to get some direction on.
Right. Yes.
Should we charge a fee or penalty of some sort for people who have started work without construction? Now, if we get a
So-
noise complaint, those typically would not come to me. I have had a few, but they would often go on the weekends or evenings to the police department. So I'm just one of many people who get complaints between fire, building, and police. And that's why I asked Kristen to join us today, because oftentimes I think she would be the main first line of defense. And I pulled up the Clarkdale form and emailed it out to everybody. Cottonwood has a form that I found. And I did want to mention that Ms. Hardy brought up a really good suggestion about how publicly accessible are these things. And I went on the Sedona website, and they actually have a webpage where they track all of their code enforcement complaints.
Mm.
And depending on whether the complaint was anonymous or not, the person's name will actually be listed as the complainant. And then it'll be assigned to a particular, Sedona has 2 code enforcement officers, 2 full-time code enforcement officers. And they say they get like 6 to 8 complaints every single day from the same half a dozen little old ladies. But anyway, they do track all those things on the department. So there's probably a lot more, depending on the jurisdiction, a lot more complaints in other jurisdictions. But I know that's a long answer to your question, but the answer is yes, and most of the complaints are dealt with fairly easily and quickly.
Thank you, Margie. Let's move along.
All right, thank you.
Mandy has her hand up.
Yes, Mandy.
Still muted? There you go.
Sorry, the buttons are weird. I'm in a weird spot. The transparency is super important.
Transparency, is that what you said?
When he was talking about it, I went to, yeah, transparency. I definitely would want to see that we're able to see everything, because that, number one, transparency. Number two, it's easier to direct a citizen complaint and say, oh, you can go here and look that up, versus maybe the telephone line of translation between 3 or 4 people. And it also shows that we're trying as much as possible to be openly clear and transparent with what we're doing as a town. So I do agree, transparency has to be primary if we're going to do this type of a situation. John had asked about enforcement, and I don't know exactly what that would look like, but or penalties, I guess, for starting work without permits. I don't know exactly what that would look like, but I think that needs to be done. I think that maybe the first time somebody does something like that, it's a reasonable penalty, but that the second, third, fourth, fifth time, that penalty is highly increased to deter the action, because there are definitely some frequent flyers who are constantly doing work or doing something without permits, or then getting them in the back end of doing them. And so I think that there needs to be some sort of a preventative measure. Sure, the first time it's a mistake, let's work with you, let's fix it, here's what the penalty is, it's kind of minor, but the second time you knew better. That's kind of the way I look at it. You can.
Good, thank you, Mandy.
And Mayor Allen has his hand up.
Steve?
Yeah, to answer 2 questions. One is all police records are public records. It doesn't matter. I mean, I can't hide anything. Any one of my records is available by the public. You'll check Arizona law for that. The only time I can keep something out of the public's eye is if the investigation itself might cause a problem in the public. I mean, could cause damage. And then I can only, like, during the course, the person hasn't been charged yet. And if we release the information, that person would see it and might flee to Alaska or something like that. But once we arrest him, it's open. You can get a copy of that report. You can get a copy of any call for service. You can get a copy of anything from the PD. So it's no different than the records at Town Hall. So this Would not
Thank you.
change any of that. Secondly, the second thing I wanted to is we've had a procedure in place, although through the years, I think we forget about them. And that was anytime a person was caught, because I've been involved in these in the past, building without a building permit, the initial slap, I shall call it, was that building permit fees were doubled automatically. So there was no fine in court. It's just that your building fees were doubled. Okay, so if you had a $75 fee for the building permit, it would now be a $150 fee for the building permit. If we've lost that along the way somewhere, that's just been due to the passing of people or something like that. So that's it.
Thank you, Chief.
We still double the building permit fee, so that's in place now.
Thank you. Any other, Candace, any other things that we need have omitted or need to include or?
No, I will say that Bill just emailed me and said he just got free and would we like him to join? And I said, sure, but he hasn't come in yet. And also I see Jane has her hand up and Margie has her hand up again.
Jane.
I was just wondering, for instance, about vehicles that I've heard a couple people mention sitting in people's yards. What happens, for instance, if somebody says, this is my hobby, tinkering on vehicles, and that's why they're there? How do you address that? I mean, I don't really want to start going after somebody just because they might have a vehicle sitting in a yard that they don't drive, but maybe once a year, or it's some project they're working on. How, I mean, I understand
Not been touched in years. The ones I've seen have not been touched in at least 4 or 5 years.
Okay, well.
And they're on their side. They're not functional. There's no, but, you know, I agree with you. I certainly, if that's someone who's rebuilding a car or doing something like that, absolutely, I have no interest in that. But when I see these on the side of a hill that are rusted out, no wheels, no this, or missing, you know, just they have plants growing over them, you know, trees growing. They're not even accessible, basically. But I agree with you. If that's a hobby or an interest, I don't want to get in the way of that. But the ones that I'm observing going up the hill, clearly over the years I've been living here, never been, I don't think the doors can even be open. But that's, you know, but you raise a good point. Thank you.
And Chief has his hand up.
Sir.
Let me make sure I'm not muted. Nope, I'm not. Okay, we addressed that many years ago in that I don't have the code in front of me, but we had talked about a permit, so to speak, that you could get at no cost that just said, hey, I've got a 32 Plymouth that's parked on my property. It's a project of mine. And I'm actively or going to be in a short period of time working on it, so that we knew that it was something that was at the forefront of this individual's plans, and we limited it to one. So you couldn't just have a junkyard in your yard and say, these are all my project cars, but you could have a unlicensed motor vehicle in your yard that you were working on. So that's very easy to resolve there. And I don't have the code in front of me, so I'd have to look. I swore we put that in there.
No, I'd like to see us go to these people and say, do you have one of these certificates or forms? And if not, we'll give you one. And so it's good. It lasts for 2 years, and then we'll take a picture of the vehicle and let's see the improvement within the 2 years or whatever.
Mayor Alex has her hand up.
Yes, Alex.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about that property maintenance code. When we put it into ordinance, I'm pretty sure zoning administrator went around and checked everything out. If you had a car parked on the street that did not have registration on it, they would make you either get registration on it or get rid of it. Alan had talked about how he doesn't have the ordinance in front of him. I do not either. But I think I remember in that ordinance, if you had it in a shed or if you had it in your backyard where people couldn't see it, then it was okay. So on that property maintenance code and ordinance, they talked about junk piles. They talked about junk cars. They talked pretty much just about visual blight. So what happened when we put it into ordinance was it was followed up on, and then no one's followed up on it since then. So
Right.
those are my 2 cents on that.
Thanks, Alex. And
You're
you know what I
welcome.
mean? And I agree with you. You know, these are ones I can see from the road easily without even stepping tippy toes. None of these are in a shed. They're piled up. They're junk. There's no way they're functional, and they're outside and exposed. And so I would love to see us, you know, speak to the owner and say, what's the plan? You know, because I think at some point they could be a hazard to the people that live below the houses, you know, as I look at them, you know, and anyway, but thank you, Alex. Appreciate the clarification. Any other
We
questions?
have Bill Sims with us now, if there's any questions for him.
Sorry, I had a different council meeting at 11, and so I just got off. I apologize. I'm late.
It's okay. We were just talking about punctuality and leadership development. Oh,
Well, this other one was scheduled a long time ago, so I told
okay.
Candace
Good
knew.
to see you, Counselor. It's always a treat. Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there any stone that's not unturned? And I don't know, we've gone through most everything, Bill, and very good discussion, very good comments about the civil versus criminal, a bunch of things. Alan has done some great things and provided some great information. Council members have as well. Good questions, good discussion. And I didn't know whether, Candace, was there anything that
I would just ask council how you want to, you know, and maybe you have to think about this, but how do you want to deal with situations like the one Alan mentioned, which is longstanding, where there was a violation that was ignored? You know, at what point do you want to address it, and how?
Well, that's the thing, you know, there's certain things on the books. I'm wondering whether is this something that we should have brought up to a meeting and see in action so citizens can see that this is going to be discussed and reinforced, if you will, at a council meeting
Right.
in January, February, that we're going to say, okay, we want to remind people that this is in place, and that now we're going to maybe for the new year take a little more active role in this. It's sort of slid away a little bit, but I think for some of these issues, we're going to be a little more vigilant.
You have hands up now from Mandy and Sage.
Okay, Sage, please.
So I'm just gonna ask Candace, when you say the situation, we're talking about the long-term situation?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I would suggest something like the zoning administrator, the building inspector going to this place and doing a follow-up on it and check and see if they are in compliance with their building permits, their extensions, safety on the property under construction, enforcement. Thank you.
Thanks, and I think, you know, to that regard too, John and the inspector, to see if let them know that if we're dealing with the car issue or these abandoned junk cars, that say you can get a permit for this. If this is a hobby of yours that you're working on, you can have this for X period of time. But if it's not, then you have X period of time to deal with it. I don't know what the verbiage is in the ordinance code about that, but certainly I would like to encourage our staff to go out and do that too. Thanks, Sage.
I think if I could clarify what I was referring to was Alan had mentioned, excuse me, a residence that was converted to a duplex years ago without any objection from the town apparently, or no enforcement at that time, and has since been lived in and used that way for several years. And, you know, where does that stand? That kind of thing, because that's probably not the only one. And that's what I just would like council to think about and how to address. And Mandy has her hand up.
You muted, Mandy.
Oh, sorry. I didn't hear you recognize me. I'm inclined to agree with Sage here. I know she and I kind of think the same about a lot of this process as far as, you know, We just have to treat everybody equally. But I would like to, especially with some of those longer term projects where I don't want to discourage a property owner, and even newer projects, I want to do our best to work with that property owner and make sure that we're doing everything we can as a town to support, inform, assist, so that the properties are maintained or restored or put in a safer condition or a more livable condition.
Cool.
I want to see as many of these houses as possible function again. So I'm not against that, but we do have to make sure that everybody's being treated the same. And so especially with maybe some of the more longer term projects,
Thank you.
To make sure that our approach is assistive is really important.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Was there another hand up?
Sage.
Sage, yes, please.
Yeah, it's a question for Bill Sims. What is there legal recourse for someone who has done something like that, built an apartment and made a house a single family residence, a duplex? If we go and enforce that now years later, do we have a leg to stand on enforcing that now?
My question. Yeah.
You've actually described a case. I'm the Cave Creek town attorney. In Cave Creek, there was a property owner who incurred a substantial expense to put a home on the side of a hill, and as only they would do in Cave Creek with the wealthy constituents. And the town then opposed it later and tried to suggest and did suggest that it violated, and it did violate their elements of their zoning code. And the court said no, the word is stopped from enforcing it because the amount of expense that the owner had incurred. That case I think is 20 years old. There's been more recent cases where the courts have swung the other way and have said that we can correct errors made by our staff. So it's all factually dependent. I suspect it would be difficult to enforce. Having said that, it doesn't mean you shouldn't try. Having said that, it means you should probably enforce, certainly going forward, and just argue that the others were the result of actions prior to us, and rather than incur the expense, we'll move on. In fact, isn't that exactly what we decided to do with the one, was it the triplex, the one that we've extended till April? And so, so the answer is the law is changing. It lets us, the government, correct errors, but given the magnitude of the error, given the expense incurred by the property owner, given the length of time, it's likely that a court would not support you. And so
the one that we're talking about in particular right now, I believe, has been about 4 years.
That's a lot shorter than normally that I would think up there, but that would be, I think we should look at it and see.
And I also believe that he's trying to turn in a building that is in his backyard into another place to live in, or have friends stay in when they come to visit.
Is that for John Knight? Is that permitted in that zoning district? Then the answer would be we may have grandfathered something in because of our prior negligence in terms of enforcing. But if he's about to do something now that is not consistent with code, we have every right to say no. And in fact, we should.
He already has. He's wired electricity to the building behind his house with extension cords.
But is that constitute illegal use, John? I don't think it would.
I'd have to take a look at it, but I think we need to take a look at it anyway because of the duplex. Alan's brought this, Chief Muma's brought this up a couple times, and Sage as well. So this is just one of potentially many illegal duplexes or triplexes. As we hear about them, I think we need to, like Mr. Sims said, we need to go after them, whether we're successful or not. I'm not sure, but eventually they'll want something from us. They'll want to do some sort of addition or permit, or eventually want to sell it. And any buyer is going to want to know that it's been done, whatever the work is, it's been done legally. So I think we should try on these things. Again, one of my thoughts initially was, we'll just drive around with blinders on, and if we get a complaint, we'll go after it. But I don't think that is an appropriate way to proceed, Because if you do go after one guy, he's going to turn around and point at his neighbor and say, why did you let this go for 4 years? So this is one example, I think, of probably several that we need to at least notify them and see if we can get them to remove whatever illegal work that they've done.
Thank you.
And I just saw the comment from Councilmember Harvey, no blinders.
Mandy has her
Life
hand.
used to be easier.
I don't know if you could hear me. Mandy has her hand up.
Hey. Mandy?
The this is this is not an uncommon phenomena to have things being done. Sorry, not uncommon to have things being done currently, and things happen faster than people realize sometimes in this town. We don't all live on Jerome Time, and when people are trying to do things without permits, it does tend to happen pretty quick. And so the enforcement, I think, also needs to happen quickly. It's not something that can sit. There are at least 4 projects going on currently that I'm aware of that are unpermitted projects and unapproved projects by whether design review, planning and zoning, or building permit. And they're actually all projects that I would love to see happen. But again, we all have to follow the same rules. And if the projects are not being done safely, that's a major concern. But also, to do things in an underhanded way is not really the spirit of Jerome. Thanks.
Thank you, Mandy.
So, Mayor, I have a question for Bill Sims.
Yes, please.
Given that there are some issues in town that have been longstanding and nothing has been done, and to start enforcing now on a consistent basis with the possibility that those people then point to those older issues, would it be good for council to make a public declaration of some kind, draw a line in the sand and say, we're going to try to address these older ones, and we're definitely addressing everything from this point forward, so that the perception that you can get away with things goes away?
I completely agree. I truly think you ought to take an inventory of those, and it shouldn't be waiting for a neighbor to blame. And that if you're aware of something, first of all, I'm hearing that this council going forward is going to enforce its codes. In doing that, there's going to be a relative deprivation. They're going to say you haven't enforced it looking backwards. To the extent you're aware of a property owner who is currently occupying or using a property contrary to your zoning code, building code, or whatever code, I think you need to formally document your awareness and inform the owner that it's in violation and request the owner to address the violation. Now, that may be a Pyrrhic alternative because maybe they can't, but then let them raise the issue of, I've been doing this for 10 years. The prior zoning administrator said I could, and let them document the file as to why we're not going to go to court. Then that can then we can say, but then we tell them at the same time where John was going, fine, but be aware that just because there may have been a failure to enforce backward, it doesn't mean we're not going to enforce any changes to that use going forward. And much like I truly believe that's going to be a non-conforming use, I think we apply the very rigorous standards of non-conforming use. And if, as Jane has pointed out, if they extend or different uses, I think we can prohibit it. So we at least tell the new property owners who are having to comply with every provision of our code, that the ones who slipped by in the past still have the pain, wrong word, still have the obligation to satisfy codes going forward regarding their use. Then I think we are treating people even-handedly. So we identify the ones out of compliance. We document that in a writing to be aware. We inform them that they should be in compliance and ask them why they believe they shouldn't. They then document for us why we can carve out the exception. And in response, then we say, be advised, however, you assert these rights that we may or may not agree with, and we may elect not to enforce at this time. But if you have any change in use going forward, we have every right to enforce there. And I think that way you are enforcing it going forward, and you're not wasting time chasing your tail looking backwards, but you are putting those on notice that you will be watching. That will help the ones who are having to have their rights having their property enforced going forward, that you're not just ignoring the ones in the back. So, but that's not an easy task. This is a fairly substantial task.
Mandy has her hand up.
Mandy?
Sorry, I just forgot to take it down.
Okay.
Good. No worries. Any other comments, questions, responses?
Oh, Jane has her hand up.
All right, Jane.
The other thing we haven't addressed is some of the buildings in town that are sitting empty and some falling apart. And we've seen a few be fixed, a few fallen down. That seems to me to be also part of this, especially if they're a danger. And I know some of these places probably are pack rat homes. And I know the previous council had set aside money to, okay, if the property owner can't address this situation of an unsafe building or a historic building that's falling apart, the town could do something that needed to be done on it and put a lien on the property. Is this something that we also want to consider in this? Because I can think of a couple, well, at least 4 buildings right now that are falling apart. And do we want to go that far as maintenance standards for the town? A couple of them are very visible. A couple of them are not. But also in thinking about needing affordable housing here in town, maybe that's something that we could look at to keep buildings, functional buildings, and not falling apart. Do we want to discuss that as well?
I just want to point out that we did do that last year.
Right.
We do have a lien on one building in town that we did.
Right, but there are a few others. John and I talked about them yesterday a little bit, but there are potential places that people could be living if the buildings were fixed up, if there's some way we could do something like that.
Well, I think we can certainly do it. I think the question is to start the conversation with them. Are they willing to do it?
Right. And
You
is
know,
that something that we would want to do?
Yeah, and I think that might be something, sorry to interrupt you, but I think certainly that's worthy of a conversation with them and say, hey, is this something you're interested in doing? Collaborating with the town, if you will, so you don't get, you don't lose any much, but we have an opportunity to help the town, and can we do it together? Approach it from a positive perspective, I think, and certainly I would have no issue at all to have John, or maybe even a committee with you and John or whatever, to reach out to some of the folks that you may know that own these buildings, say, hey, this idea came up. What do you think about it? Would you be willing to let the town work with you on this thing to see if we can both benefit from this, and see how that goes? I'm certainly comfortable with that. I don't know with Bill if that's a legal thing that we can do or not, or whether or not it's something that is the juice worth the squeeze.
The problem is the abatement statute is not cooperative. The abatement statute says you shall do this, and if you don't, we will. And if we do, we're going to charge you my time and interest and all the rest.
Yeah.
We did, and I know the one you're talking about, Candace. It was John. I think it was 2 DAs before John.
I was going to say, it's not familiar to me.
No, it wasn't. He spent a lot of time, but didn't the property owner, didn't it get sold? And then so we no longer were dealing with the old property owner, and then the new property owner says, fine, put a lien on it, and when we sell it, we'll pay you off. I don't think it was cooperative. It ended up being cooperative because I think it was a passive owner. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, it wasn't a large lien either. It was like $5,000. So.
Okay.
And Dr. Mayor, if I could just add something I learned about Bisbee as well.
Yes, please.
Jane, as Jane mentioned, we had a good conversation yesterday about several code enforcement kind of related things. And Jane has just mentioned some of these buildings. The Tamale Lady's House comes to mind. There's another one on 89A, the old gas station owned by Lozano. I suspect there's probably another half dozen of them out there that are abandoned. One of the things that Bisbee does is And I'd have to look into this a little more and get some comments and thoughts from our counselor here. But one of the things Bisbee does is they actually send them a letter saying that they're going to start the eminent domain process to acquire the property. And properties have relatively low value since they've been abandoned, and they actually work with a nonprofit organization that then would take over the property and build affordable housing on the property. So a really interesting approach. They said that they've actually been very successful, and they have 4 properties recently that they've acquired where property owners are out of state, out of town, they don't want to deal with it anymore, and they voluntarily just sign it over to the town and let the, in this case, the city of Bisbee, take it over, turn it over to a nonprofit, and they build affordable housing on the site. So that's maybe a little more complicated process, but it's an interesting idea. It's worth exploring.
Yes. I think we need, I think we should do something. I think Jane raised a very good point, and you know, that may be a solution pathway. I think certainly to have some dialogue with the owner to see what their plan is, and would they be open to some type of next step, and then we can start just to see.
Start with that, right?
That's what I would suggest. And then if you are able to do it, and Jane, if you can point John in the right direction and of some of the properties, but clearly I think it will be great if everybody can walk away from it in a positive way. Thank you. And thanks, Bill. Any other, that was very good, Jane. Thanks. Any other questions, comments, or input for the good of the order, please? Hey. Okay. Well, it's 12:16. If hearing nothing else, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
No, we have another agenda item.
I was going to say, I think there's one more item that snuck in there.
I don't see it on mine. My
COVID-19.
It's to discuss COVID expenses that are supposed to be paid by DEMA.
Oh, I don't have that on my copy. I must have an old version of the agenda. Sorry. Yes, my apologies. Let's move to that. Candace, please.
Candace, you're on mute.
Candace, you're muted.
Thank you. I had given you a memo and a list of our COVID expenses. The vast majority right now are for the lighted message boards and the rental of the porta potties, which together come to about $18,000. I have submitted those with what I consider to be pretty good arguments to DEMA for reimbursement. Before we got the message boards, I had called and they said, oh yeah, that'll be covered, but that kind of changed since in the meantime. So he was not as certain now. I think they will be, but I wanted to bring it to council's attention that it's a possibility that we may have to absorb that expense rather than be reimbursed for 80%. And in that situation, how you would like to proceed. Chief Muma did look into the purchase of a smaller solar powered sign, but the cost of that would be $13,000, which is more than we've spent so far on the rentals. And another option he said was to purchase and hang 4 by 8 foot banners at each location with the same message. That wouldn't get nearly as much, it wouldn't grab you quite the same way, obviously, as the lighted signs. We did get a email correspondence to our website from Nancy Smith asking that we please retain the message board, at least by the hogback, because she feels it's very important to let people know as they're coming into town that way. I just wanted to get council's position on this going forward. I'm still waiting to hear, but I wouldn't want to take anything down till we know for sure that we're not going to be able to get reimbursed. But I think that we will. I think I made some good arguments. Being a tourist town, it's really the only way to protect our staff from the virus is to get the word out in that way to the tourists coming through. And that's kind of unique for us. But anyway, that's.
Thank you. Any other thoughts or comments on that?
Sage has her hand up.
Sage, please.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, please.
Yeah, my thing is with the porta potties at this point, they're costing us a lot of money and all of our restaurants are open. Majority of our businesses are open. The public restrooms are open at the Motor State Company. The public restrooms are open at the fire station. The only public restrooms that aren't open are at the co-op. And I think that that is.
We lost you.
I'm done.
Thanks, Sage. So I guess, Sage, what you're suggesting is that maybe the porta potties, we could, let's drop them from the list and maintain the signage for the moment, since the signage is so effective, and maybe
I like the signage. I really like the signage. I know people find it offensive, but I find it offensive that they don't want to wear their masks and follow the rules. So I think we should keep the signs, and maybe Alan can work on getting us our own signs so we don't have to rent them so much. But just the porta potties, I think, are excessive at this point, because all of our businesses are pretty much open and people have access to public restrooms, and it's costing us a lot. And I have a feeling that's one of the things that DEMA is going to say that we are not going to get reimbursed for.
Are there any other thoughts on the porta potty question? That's a great suggestion. So I think Candace.
Dr. Mayor?
Yes, please.
I don't disagree with the ones in the business district, but I would like to see the ones in town hall parking lot maintained. That's really for our residents, not for our visitors who are coming to use the internet connections and to pick up materials from the library. And I know that we have, especially with the ups and downs of kids being in and out of school and doing things virtually, and then also, just the basics of having to fill out if you're still on unemployment, if you need assistance, all that stuff has to be done digitally. And so to keep those at town hall, especially, I think is important for our citizens.
Thank you. Sage,
More
are you
so
okay
than-
with that? If we
So now-
modify?
I agree with her on that one, because it is for
since
our
that's where they're going to
citizens.
use the.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I
Yeah,
concur.
and it's not for the public, it's for the people that are going to
Yeah,
use the services
absolutely.
of the library, because they don't have their own services.
Yes, absolutely.
Mayor, Alex,
Yes, and for Kent Day, thank you.
Thank you. Alex, did you have a comment, please?
you
Let
muted.
me
Alex.
unmute myself. Candace, do you think it's possible that we could argue for a permanent message board in, the DEMA grant? I mean, if so, it's not too bad so far. Like you say, it's around 13. I might be able to get a little smaller one lighted for a little bit more, or a little bit less, I mean. But if it's offset by 80%, then it would be a reasonable, and we can use these things forever.
Yeah.
I totally agree. And
Yes.
I think it would be a good investment in the long term regardless, really.
Right.
And so I think we should just try it and take a shot and see if we can't get reimbursed. And if we can't, it's still probably worth doing. That's my opinion.
Yeah. And I think, and John even did mention in his chat that the having the restroom, the porta potty there by the town hall for the court days is a good thing as well.
Yes.
So I think we sort of have agreement on that the other ones we could get rid of, but keep the ones at the town hall.
Okay.
Please, direction. Thank you. That was great point, Sage. Great, Alex, and Mandy and John. Thank you. And thank you, Alan. That's great if we can get a deal on that. That'd be very cool. Because I think the sign is clearly effective. You know what I mean? And I think we need that to be around for a while, years. is my thought.
Probably.
That's my thought. Anyway, and anything, and Ken, just I've reached out to our new supervisor Donna about the vaccinations here in town, that to make sure she hasn't been as visible as the predecessor. Randy was really outstanding in my mind, but I think it's hopefully I said to please make sure that you pay attention to the population of Jerome. We have a lot of high-risk people up here, and I want to make sure that we get in the queue for the vaccination at the earliest opportunity for our citizens. So any input that you get or hear anything about it, please share that with Candace and myself, so we can really try to do the best we can to get our citizens that choose to be immunized, get them immunized. Thank you. Any other comments, discussions, or questions?
Motion to adjourn.
That voice sounds so familiar to me. I love it. Is there a second, please? I'll second. Okay, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. We are
Aye.
adjourned. We're adjourned at 12:24. Thank you all very much. Chief Muma, thank you very much.
Thank
John,
you.
and everybody for their input. Best wishes for a very happy, healthy, safe new year. Be safe out there. And I'm really looking forward to January 6th to see how that all unfolds in Congress. So thank you very much. Best wishes.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.